Imagine a man of advanced age with an apparently stable life. His name was Abram. He lived in Ur of the Chaldees, a prosperous city in Mesopotamia where people worshipped many false gods. It was a rich, bustling culture, but completely distant from the true God. And it was exactly in this scenario that God chose Abram for something great. One day, in a surprising way, the Lord spoke to him. It was not an idea in his mind. It was aerial and clear call. Leave your country, your relatives, and your father's house, and go to the land that I will show you. Genesis 12:1. Think about it. God was asking him to leave everything behind. His home, his family, his past, his securities, and set out into the unknown. But God also made a promise that would change not only Abram's life, but the history of humanity. I will make of you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great. You will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. In you, all the families of the earth will be blessed. Genesis 12:2-3. Now think about it. A 75-year-old man with a barren wife being told that he would become a great nation. In human eyes, that was impossible. But Abram did not question. He obeyed, he believed. And that faith was what made him so special in the eyes of God. So he left, not alone, but with his wife. Sarai, your nephew horse, his servants, his livestock, and all his possessions. It was the beginning of a journey of faith, with no map, no set destination, just a promise in his heart. This departure from Ur of the Chaldees was not only geographical, it was spiritual. It was a break with the past, to experience something new with God. And so begins the story of Abraham, the father of faith. An ordinary man with limitations, but with a heart willing to hear the voice of God and obey, even without understanding everything. Abraham had left everything behind, his homeland, his family, and all the life he knew. Now he walked with his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, and his possessions, toward a land he did not even know exactly where it was, just trusting in God's guidance. When he arrived at Canaan, God spoke to him again. It was as if the Lord was saying, "You trusted me, now look what I have for you." And then God took him to a place called Shechem by the oak of Moreh. There God did something even more specific. He said, "To your descendants I will give this land." Genesis 12:7. Now stop and think. This 75-year-old man with a sterile wife hearing God promise a descendant and a land. To human eyes it made no sense, but to the eyes of faith it made all the sense in the world. Abraham believed again. He built an altar there to the Lord, and he was not the only one. Wherever he went, Abraham built altars. This showed that he not only walked by faith, but also worshipped and recognized the presence of God on your journey. This promise of a great nation was not just about children. God was saying that from Abraham would come a people, a whole story, which would be an example, a channel of blessing and a gateway to salvation for the world. In you, all the families of the earth will be blessed. That was the God's first great verbal covenant with Abraham. And even without children, even without land still in his possession, he kept walking, waiting, trusting and obeying. This moment shows that true faith does not depend on circumstances. It depends on who promised, and the one who promised it was God himself. Even with God's promise, not everything in Abraham's life went smoothly. In fact, soon after arriving in the promised land, unexpected problem he appeared. There was famine in the land. Imagine this. God had said that that land would be his and his descendants, but now it was dry, difficult to plant, difficult to live in. Abraham found himself in a crisis. And what did he do? He made a practical decision, went down to Egypt, where there were more resources. Now here comes a very human moment in the story of Abraham, an episode that shows that even though he was the father of faith, he also had fears, failures, and insecurities. As Abraham approached Egypt, he began to fear for his life. Sarai, his wife, was very beautiful, even at an advanced age. And he thought, If the Egyptians find out that she is my wife, they will kill me and leave her alive." So Abraham made a deal with Sarai to say she was his sister. And indeed, when they arrived in Egypt, the Egyptians saw Sarai's beauty and took her to Pharaoh's palace. She was treated as a woman worthy of marrying the king. Meanwhile, Abraham received many gifts: sheep, oxen, donkeys, servants and camels. But what seemed like a smart plan turned out to be a serious problem. God intervened. The Lord struck Pharaoh's house with serious plagues. And somehow Pharaoh realized that the problem was related to Sarai's presence in his palace. Then he went to Abraham and said indignantly, "Why didn't you tell me she was your wife? Why did you say she was your sister?" Pharaoh returned Sarai to Abraham and ordered him to leave Egypt immediately with everything he owned. This moment in history is important because it shows two fundamental truths. God protects his own, even when they fail. Faith is a journey with ups and downs. Abraham made a mistake, yes. He acted out of fear, but God did not abandon him because of that. God kept it, corrected it, and continued with it because the promise still stood. And with that, Abraham returns from Egypt, richer, more experienced, and continues his journey to the promised land, where the story is just beginning. After leaving Egypt, Abraham returned to the land of Canaan with everything he had acquired: many livestock, servants, and possessions. His nephew Horse, who had accompanied him since the beginning of the journey, was now also very prosperous. Both had been blessed with material wealth, cattle, silver, gold, to the point that the earth cannot support both of them together. And then conflict arose. Abraham's shepherds and Lot's shepherds began to argue among themselves. It was a constant fight over pasture, space, and water. Furthermore, in that same region lived the Canaanites and the Perizzites, foreign people who were watching everything. The situation was becoming delicate, but Abraham, with wisdom and humility, called Lot for a conversation. "Let there be no strife between me and you, or between my herdsmen and yours, for we are brothers. The whole land is before you. If you go to the left, I will go to the right. If you go to the right, I will go to the left." Genesis 13:8-9. Abraham had the right to choose first. After all, he was the one who had received God's promise. But he preferred to keep the peace and let Lot decide. A noble, generous gesture and one of faith. Abraham knew that God is the one who guarantees the blessing, not the geographical location. Lot, looking around, chose with his eyes. He saw the green plains of the Jordan, fertile, well-watered, like the Garden of Eden or the lands of Egypt. And without hesitation he went to live there, near the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, known for their wickedness. He went in search of ease, of appearance. But little did he know that his choice would bring serious consequences. After Lot left, God spoke to Abraham again. It was as if, now that their paths were separated, the Lord wanted to reinforce the promise. "Lift up your eyes and look from the place where you are, northward and southward and eastward and westward. All the land that you see I will give to you and your descendants after you forever." Genesis 13:14-15, and more. "I will make your descendants like the dust of the earth. If anyone can count the dust, he can also count your descendants." Abraham then moved to the oak groves of Mamre, close to Hebron, and there he built another altar to the Lord. This moment in history teaches us that sometimes you have to give up to preserve peace. The most beautiful path is not always the safest. God honors those who trust in him above appearances. Abraham did not hold on to the best piece of land. He held on to the God's promise. Before continuing, like this video and subscribe to the channel. It's really quick. Time passed, and Lot, now living in the vicinity of Sodom, found himself in the middle of a war between kings. Yes, at that time, kingdoms and cities often fought for territory, power and control, and that is exactly what happened. 4 powerful kings, led by Chedorlaomer, went to war against 5 kings of the region where Lot lived, including the king of Sodom. The conflict was brutal. The kings of Sodom and Gomorrah were defeated, their cities sacked, and in the midst of it all, Lot was taken prisoner, along with his goods and servants. When Abraham learned, through an escaped messenger, that his nephew had been captured, he didn't hesitate. Even though we no longer lived together, Abraham still considered Lot as family, and the family protects itself. So he gathered 318 trained men born in his house and set out on a bold mission: pursue and confront powerful kings with their own armies. One man with a small group facing kingdoms. During the night, with strategy and courage, Abraham attacked. And the Bible says that he rescued Lot, freed the prisoners, recovered all the stolen goods, and even brought back the women and the people. It was an impressive victory. On his return, Abraham was welcomed by two kings. The first was Melchizedek, king of Salem and priest of the Most High God. This mysterious man blessed Abraham and brought out bread and wine. And then something very important happened. Abraham gave Melchizedek a tenth of everything. Genesis 14:20. It was an act of gratitude, reverence, and recognition that the victory came from God. Soon after, the king of Sodom appeared and made a proposal. Keep the goods, just give me back the people. But Abraham refused. I lift up my hand to the Lord, God Most High, creator of heaven and earth, and I will not take anything that belongs to you, not even a thread or the strap of a sandal, so that you will not be able to say, I made Abraham rich. Genesis 14:22-23. Here we see once again the character of Abraham. He did not want human riches. He wanted God's blessing. He knew who his source was. This episode shows that Abraham was not only a man of faith, but also of action, courage, and integrity. He protects his own, honors God with everything he has, and does not allow himself to be corrupted by power or riches. Abraham had already won battles, made difficult decisions, and followed his faith until that point. But one question still weighed on his heart. Lord, what about the promise? What about the son you said you would give me? Abraham had riches, servants, lands, but the main promise had not yet been fulfilled. I didn't have a child yet, and Sarai, his wife, remained barren. He began to think that perhaps God's blessing would be fulfilled through a faithful servant named Eliezer, born in your house. But God answered, firmly and tenderly, this one will not be your heir, but he who will be born of your own will be your heir, Genesis 15:4. And then God did something remarkable. He took Abraham out of the tent under the night sky and said to him, look now toward heaven and count the stars, if you are able to count them. So will your descendants be. Genesis 15:5. Imagine this scene. Abraham, now old, looking at the infinite sky full of stars, an image impossible to forget, and there beneath that immensity he believed. Simply believe, and here is one of the most powerful phrases in the Bible. And he believed the Lord, and it was counted to him as righteousness. Genesis 15:6. God did not see just one man. He saw true faith, and it was based on this faith that God decided to seal an alliance. In those days, covenants were sealed with blood. God told Abraham to prepare a ceremony. He was to take animals, a heifer, a goat, a ram, a turtle dove, and a young pigeon, and cut them in half, placing each half facing the other, as was the custom. Abraham obeyed and waited. When the sun went down, he fell into a deep sleep, and then a powerful vision of God. God spoke about the future. He said that Abraham's descendants would be pilgrims, suffering for 400 years in a foreign land, Egypt, but that they would then be freed with great wealth. God was revealing Israel's future. And then, in the midst of the darkness, a fire passed between the pieces of animals. It was God himself symbolically sealing the covenant. Abraham did not pass between the pieces. Only God passed. This showed that God was taking full responsibility for the promise. It did not depend on Abraham's efforts. It depended on God's faithfulness. On that day, the Lord made a covenant with Abraham, saying, to your descendants, I will give this land. Genesis 15:18. This moment sealed the trust between man and God, eternal covenant based on faith, and the promise was now more than words. It was a divine commitment sealed by God himself. God's promise had been made, the covenant had been sealed, but the years kept passing, and still no sign of the promised son. Abraham was already about 85 years old. Sarai, his wife of similar age, continued sterile. No sign of pregnancy, no movement of the cradle in the tent. Faith held on, but human hope was starting to wear thin. It was then that Sarai had a bold and culturally common idea at that time. She called so that her Egyptian servant and said to Abraham, "Since the Lord has prevented me from having children, take my servant. Perhaps I can have a family through her." Genesis 16:2. At that time, it was the practice that if a wife was barren, she would give her servant to her husband to bear children in her place. But what seemed like a practical solution would soon turn into a deep emotional and spiritual conflict. Hagar became pregnant, and as soon as this happened, she began to despise Sarai. The dynamic between the two has changed. Sarai, previously in control, now felt humiliated, inferior. She felt betrayed, even though it had been her idea. Then she went to Abraham, indignant. "May the reproach I receive be upon you." Genesis 16:5. Abraham, trying to avoid conflict, said, "The servant is in your hands. Do with her whatever seems good to you." Sarai then humiliated Hagar severely, to the point that Hagar fled to the desert alone and pregnant. But there in the desert something extraordinary happened. One angel of the Lord appeared to Hagar at a spring of water and called her by name. "Hagar, Sarai's servant, where have you come from and where are you going?" And then he gave him an order and a promise. "Return to your mistress and submit yourself under her hand. And I will multiply your descendants so much that they will be too numerous to count." Genesis 16:9-10. The angel also revealed that the son would be called Ishmael, which means God hears, because the Lord had heard Hagar's affliction. And what's more, Ishmael would be strong. He would live free, even though in conflict with his brothers. Hagar was so touched by this encounter that she gave the Lord a special name. "You are the God who sees me." Genesis 16:13. She returned, gave birth to Ishmael, and Abraham was 86 years old when your son was born. But here it is important to understand, Ishmael was not the son of promise. He was a son of Abraham, yes, but the promise made by God involved a son, begotten between him and Sarai, his wife. Ishmael's story would have consequences, but the divine plan was still in motion, and it was about to take a new step. Abraham now had 99 years. It had passed 15 years old since the birth of Ishmael. During all this time, no new word from God, no sign, until suddenly the Lord appeared to him again. God began by declaring who he was. "I am God Almighty. Walk before me and be blameless." Genesis 17:1. Then God did something amazing, reaffirmed his covenant with Abraham, but this time with even more details and with a physical and perpetual sign. First, God changed Abram's name to Abraham. Abram meant exalted father. Abraham came to mean father of many nations, for I have made you a father of many nations. Genesis 17:5. The promise was expanded. God promised entire nations. Coming out of Abraham, said that kings would come from their lineage, and reaffirmed that the land of Canaan would be the eternal possession of their descendants. Then God instituted a visible sign of the covenant, a circumcision. "This is my covenant, which you shall keep between me and you. Every male among you shall be circumcised." Genesis 17:10. It was a physical, intimate, and permanent act to remind that those people belonged to God. Every male baby from the 8 days old should be circumcised. And not only the sons of blood, also the purchased servants, the foreigners, all who were part of Abraham's household. Circumcision became the visible seal of invisible faith that God expected of his people. But the most impactful moment came right after God looked at Abraham and also changed Sarai's name to Sarah, which means princess. And then he declared something almost unbelievable. I will bless Sarah, and she will bear you a son. A nation will come from her. Kings of peoples will come from her. Genesis 17:16. Abraham fell face down on the ground and laughed. Yes, he laughed, not in disbelief, but in amazement, in admiration. Can a child be born to a man who is 100 years old? And Sarah, who is 90 years old, will give birth to a child? Genesis 17:17. And Abraham even tried to suggest that Ishmael was the heir of the promise. I would take Ishmael to live before you. But God was clear. Indeed, your wife Sarah will bear you a son, and you will call his name Isaac. He laughs. I will establish my covenant with him. Genesis 17:19. However, God did not forget Ishmael either. He promised, multiply it greatly, make of it 12 princes and a great nation. But the covenant of promise would come through Isaac, the son of Sarah. That same day, Abraham obeyed. He circled himself, Ishmael, and all the men in his house, even though he was 99 years old. This moment marks a renewal of faith of Abraham, the reaffirmation of the impossible by the hands of God, and confirmation of eternal commitment between the Creator and the one who would be the father of a multitude of peoples. It was an ordinary day. Abraham was sitting at the entrance to his tent in the heat of the day when 3 men suddenly appeared. They were mysterious visitors, and Abraham, as was his custom, quickly rose to welcome them with hospitality, something sacred in that culture. He ran to meet them, bowed to the ground, and said, Sirs, if I have found favor in your eyes, do not leave your servant without resting a little. Abraham offered water to wash your feet, shade to rest, and fresh bread to invigorate yourself. He himself ran to Sarah and asked her to prepare breads with the best flour. Then he went to the flock and chose a tender calf and asked a servant to prepare it with milk and curd. It was a banquet fit for kings. While they were eating under the tree, one of the visitors, which was himself Lord in human form accompanied by 2 angels, asked a direct question. Where is Sarah, your wife? There in the tent, Abraham replied, and then came the statement that would change everything. I will surely return to you about the time of your life, and Sarah, your wife, will have a son. Genesis 18:10. Sarah was listening behind the tent curtain and laughed to herself. It was a laugh of astonishment, almost of disbelief. After I'm old, will I still have this pleasure? Since my master is also old. But the Lord heard the laughter, even if it was internal, and asked, why did Sarah laugh? Is anything too hard for the Lord? Genesis 18:14. Realizing that she had been discovered, Sarah tried to deny, don't laugh. But the Lord answered firmly, but you're laughing. It wasn't a harsh rebuke, but rather a reminder. God knows even the most intimate thoughts of the heart. And most importantly, the time of the promise was being fulfilled. The child's name would be Isaac, which means exactly that. He laughs. That laughter that once came from doubt would soon become laughter of joy, of achievement, of a living miracle in the arms of a 90-year-old woman. This meeting with the 3 visitors not only confirmed the promise of Isaac's birth, but also showed what God personally visits those he loves, what nothing is impossible for him, what his timing is perfect, even if it seems time-consuming to our eyes. Immediately after the Lord reaffirmed the promise of Isaac's birth, the 3 visitors got up to continue their journey towards Sodom. Abraham, curious and concerned, accompanied them for a stretch of the way. It was then that God revealed something surprising. Shall I hide from Abraham what I'm about to do? For Abraham will surely become a great and mighty nation. Genesis 18:17-18. God shared with Abraham that would destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, cities that had become deeply corrupt. The outcry against them had ascended to heaven, and God would come down to see with his own eyes the extent of that evil. And here we see one of the most beautiful scenes of intercession of the Bible. Abraham, knowing that this nephew Lot lived in Sodom, began to intercede with courage and reverence. Lord, will you destroy the righteous with the wicked? What if there are 50 righteous in that city? God answered, if I find 50 righteous people in Sodom, I will spare the whole place for their sake. But Abraham did not stop. With humility, he continued negotiating with God. What if? It's 45, 40, 30, 20, 10, and God, patient, answered, I will not destroy it for the sake of 10. Genesis 18:32. Abraham stopped there. Perhaps he thought that at least 10 righteous there was in the city, but there wasn't. That same night, 2 angels arrived in Sodom, and Lot, who was sitting at the city gate, welcomed them hospitably, as he had learned from Abraham. He invited them into his home, prepared a feast, and offered them shelter. But the men of Sodom, they were so wicked that upon learning that there were visitors, they surrounded Lot's house and demanded that he hand them over to them so that they could abuse them. It was a moment shocking. Lot tried to stop it. He even offered his daughters in a desperate and mistaken attitude. But the angels then intervened, blinded the men of the city, protecting the house. The next morning the angels said to Lot, arise, take your wife and your daughters who are here, so that you will not be consumed in the iniquity of this city. Genesis 19:15. Horse still hesitated, but the angels took by the hand to him, his wife and daughters, and that they took them out of the city in a hurry. They said, run for your life, don't look back. And then fire and brimstone fell from heaven. God completely destroyed Sodom, Gomorrah, and the surrounding cities as judgment for ungodliness. But amid the destruction, there was a personal tragedy. Lot's wife disobeyed. When running away, she looked back and was transformed into a statue of salt. A look may seem simple, but it represented longing for the old life, attachment to sin, and disobedience to God's command. God loved Abraham very much because he was a man of faith and obeyed God, even when things seemed difficult. Because of this faith, God saved his nephew Lot from a city that was going to be destroyed. It wasn't just because of Lot, but because God remembered Abraham and heard his prayer. God promised Abraham and his wife Sarah that they would have a son, even though they were very old. And do you know what happened? A miracle. When Abraham was 100 years old and Sarah was 90, Isaac was born. They were so happy that they laughed with joy. That's why they named him Isaac, which means he laughs. But Abraham already had another son, Ishmael, with Sarah's servant Hagar. One day, Ishmael made fun of Isaac, and this made Sarah very upset. Then God told Abraham that Isaac was the son of promise and that it was time to separate the families. Even though Abraham was sad, he obeyed. But God did not forget Ishmael and also took care of him, promising to make him a great nation. Later, God made a very difficult request of Abraham, that he sacrifice his son Isaac. Abraham trusted God so much that he obeyed, even though his heart was heavy. But at the last moment, God stopped him and sent a little lamb to be the sacrifice in Isaac's place. God just wanted to see if Abraham really trusted him, and he did. After that, Abraham's life continued. Sarah died at the age of 127, and Abraham buried her with great love. Later, he too died, already old, happy, and at peace, at the age of 175. He saw that God fulfilled everything he promised, and the most incredible thing, from Abraham came an entire people, the people of Israel, and many years later, Jesus, the Savior, was born, who is also a descendant of his. The story of Abraham teaches us 3 very important things. God always keeps his promises. True faith is obeying, even without understanding everything. And God always takes care of us, even in the most difficult times. Thank you very much for watching this far. Don't forget to like and comment. I will respond to each comment about what you thought.